Welcome to the Triple E Framework. My name is Liz Kolb, and I am a clinical assistant professor at the University of Michigan in the School of Education. And I want to give you a quick overview of what the Triple E Framework is all about and how it came about. So if you go to tripleeframework.com, you may already be there as you're watching this video, and you click on the About tab, you'll see that it gives a little bit of the background. But why did we develop the Triple E framework? The main idea is that there's a lot of research around ed technology over the past 2 decades that does actually tell us what are effective and ineffective practices when using technology in the classroom, in particular to leverage learning. And what we've noticed is that most teachers, including myself many times, are not always using those effective practices, not necessarily because they don't want to, but because sometimes we don't know about those practices because we haven't done a great job getting those practices to our K-12 teachers. So this framework, the Triple E, was built on the effective practices. It infused into the framework itself. So the website talks a lot about and shares some of the different effective practices that are out there based on the studies, things we know. For example, a focus on the learning goals itself. Making sure that we have what we call kind of time on task engagement. Rather than just using technology for fun, but making sure when the students are using technology tools that they're actually focused on the learning goals and not the maybe reward or the game at the end. So there's a lot of different pieces to the research that's informed the framework, but the framework is very easy to use. So the first piece of the framework is around engagement. So if I click on the engagement tab, what I'll see, I'm going to scroll to the bottom here and just kind of share a few of the pieces of the research that informs engagement. So what is true, authentic, active engagement when it comes to technology? Well, the first piece is that we know that just having technology integrated lessons does not correlate with achievement. So we can't assume because you're using iPads or a particular piece of software that achievement or learning comprehension is going to occur. What we do know is that the focus does need to be on learning goals and the task at hand and making sure the technology is not distracting from it, as I mentioned earlier. The other piece is making sure that active engagement occurs when what we call children are minds on, or they're using many of those kind of higher order thinking skills, so creativity, analysis, critical thinking skills in order to really engage in the learning goals rather than just kind of tapping and swiping to get to the end of something or again to get to the game. Another huge piece of engagement that we often forget with technology is this idea of what we call co-use or joint media engagement, meaning that there needs to be human-to-human contact and interactions. There's a great piece recently by Zach and Barr in Frontier Psychology that talks about the importance of human-to-human contact when using technology, because that really allows students to engage in reflective thinking practices when people are probing them with questions and when students are able to kind of think and take a minute to really comprehend what they are doing with the software itself. So we see a lot of great research everywhere from the Sesame Project at the Joan Gantz Cooney Center to many different publications by Ellen Wartella and even a book called Tap, Click, and Read by Lisa Guernsey and Michael Levine about the importance of this human-to-human joint media contact. So making sure that's happening as part of engagement. So we have 3 questions then that we ask about engagement in the learning goals. Does the technology allow students to focus on the task of the assignment or activity with less distraction? So that time on task idea. Is the technology motivating students to kind of focus in on that learning process? And does the technology cause a shift in behavior to move from passive to active social learners? In other words, is there co-engagement happening in or around the software itself? And then we have our second level is this idea of what's the value added or the enhancement of the technology. So once again, we have research to support this level. One of the big pieces of research talks about the fact that drill and practice software, a lot of the software that focuses on kind of rote memorization, multiple choice questions, kind of quiz type activities, doesn't tend to show a lot of positive results when it comes to learning cognition. As a matter of fact, sometimes we see the opposite from that. So we want to be really wary of just using software that kind of has this drill and practice approach. Even the software that does all the data analytics behind the scene and connects with standards, we want to make sure that we're still building in things like co-use and joint media engagement so students can reflect on the activities that they're doing within there. The other piece is, once again, making sure that the technology is somehow scaffolding or supporting the learning, again, getting into these higher order thinking skills and strategies. So one of the things that we emphasize is quality over quantity, that using technology all the time does not necessarily bring about better learning or even more cognition for students. And so we want to make sure there is a value added to the technology we're using, and we're not just using it because it's there or we're told to use it itself. And finally, our last level is extension, and this really gets to this idea of situated cognition in the research, that technology should help to situate learning in authentic context. So if you think about that teacher that's using something like a mystery Skype in the classroom and they're Skyping with an author, the technology is allowing them to make those kinds of connections, or really bringing the real world into the classroom or the classroom out into the real world and making those connections. And again, we have the 3 questions that we want to ask when we're talking about and thinking about how is the technology extending learning. Now, the real power of the Triple E is that we've created a rubric. It's a guideline for teachers to go through and use when they're designing lesson plans. So what they'll find is at the beginning, it kind of tells you right here the results of the rubric. So if I scroll down a little bit, what you'll find is the rubric itself. So all of the questions, the 3 questions for engagement, the 3 questions for enhancement, and the 3 questions for extension are all found here in this rubric. And I can go through and look at my lesson plan and ask myself these questions, and I just have 3 different choices to make with it. So for example, does the technology tool help students focus on the learning goals with less distraction? Well, maybe I know absolutely it does, or maybe I'm looking at it going not at all, maybe a little bit, but I could do a better job with it. Does the technology help to motivate the students? So once again, I can go through all of the questions as I'm looking at my lesson plan, and eventually get to the point where you don't even have to use this tool. You just have it memorized because there's only 9 questions, and you get to a point where you know what you want to be looking for. And then when I hit submit, what it does is first, once again, it will tell me what my results are, and then it actually gives me the results. So here it says I'm 10 out of 18. So if I go and look at the results, I can see that's what we call a yellow light. And it means that, this is probably doing a decent job of connecting the learning goals and the technology together, but I might be able to even do a better job if I really look through this rubric and think about what are the areas that I'm missing. Now, sometimes those areas I can't change with the technology choice, but I like my technology choice, and the way that I can change it is through instructional strategies. So we have some suggestions of different instructional strategies that you can use for each level to help get those levels from maybe a 0 to a 2 on the scale, so going from not at all to absolutely. And these are good literacy and math instructional strategies that you have probably learned about in your own teacher education, that you probably use. It's just a reminder that we should be using these with technology tools and not throwing them away just because we have technology tools. So things such as guided practice, or teaching students to self-monitor, or use reflective thinking practices. All of these are things that we kind of have in our back pockets, but we tend to forget to bring out when students have technology in front of them. And that's really what this framework helps remind us about, is that it's not about a specific tool. And notice there's no particular tools emphasized on the framework, because any tool can be a great tool for learning if there's good instructional strategies around it. And any tool that is touted as a great tool for learning may end up not helping learning or being very effective simply because of the fact that the instructional strategies placed with it aren't actually getting to the effective techniques that we know are true in the research. A couple other resources that you might find helpful. We have lesson planning templates involved in here that you can download and use and adjust and change. We have sample templates that give examples of how teachers are using the rubric and designing it into the lesson plan itself. There's also, our blog is full, chock full of lots and lots of different sample and example lessons from teachers who have shared their lessons on how they're using technology to engage, enhance, and extend learning. And they give kind of their example of their lesson and then what they're doing in their lesson. And you can search in here by different topics and categories. So if you're a secondary teacher, your science, you can click on that and see some different science lessons and examples of different ways that schools and teachers are meeting the EEE framework. So is it perfect? No. But is it a benchmark? Yes. It's a way to try to match the research with what you're doing in the classroom in a very simple and easy way.